everybody. Welcome to another episode of Limited Resources. This episode number 545. My name is Marshall. I'm one of your Limited Resources, and joining me on the line, just like always, from Denver, Colorado, it's Luis Scott-Vargas. Luis, how are you?
I'm doing pretty well. You know, getting through all this, and just working on content as usual. You know, I don't know. Life is weird right now for everyone, and it can be difficult to tell which day it is sometimes.
Yeah, for sure.
So,
yeah.
I mean, we usually talk about the like when we're going to do the show on Monday, and then it was like Wednesday evening. I'm like, we haven't really talked about the show. We should probably figure out when we're doing that.
Yeah, and it's always like that, how we figure it out. And now it's Wednesday today, and we're doing it. So
yeah.
Who knows what day it is? Right. So we've got a Q&A show lined up. These are some of our favorite episodes to do because we get to answer your questions. That's right. If you're a patron of LR, there'll be a post that goes up for each of these shows that we do. And you could submit questions about, well, we like to be pretty open with them, honestly. Ikoria-based stuff is great. But if you have general limited questions or even life stuff, we don't mind talking about that kind of stuff too, just to kind of round things out. And we've got a whole bunch of them to try to get through here today. So we're going to get through as many as we can. Before we do, let's mention our sponsor, channelfireball.com. How are things going over at CFB? I know we've been getting, news here and there about them reopening back up again. The CFB Pro stuff went live. How are things with CFB right now?
Oh, they're going well. We're back in business. We're happy that we're shipping orders again. We're buying cards again. We have a cool thing lined up for this weekend. Actually, it's on It came together kind of on short notice, but it's the CFP Pro Showdown. What it is, it's a free tournament for anyone who is a member of CFP Pro, and it's $1,000 store credit prize pool. It's going to be a standard tournament on Arena. You can still sign up for it if you sign up for CFP Pro between now and I think Friday evening. The tournament's on Saturday. And the winner gets to play against me to double their prize. So I get to be the end boss for that.
Oh, man, that's cool. I did notice, by the way, that a bunch of the Team CFP guys and everybody was like, I want to be the end boss. They're jealous of you.
Yeah, someone asked if they could risk their prize to get it even, like a 3x multiplier, right? Instead of the double free roll. And I said, well, only if you're playing against, if we'd accept that if you're playing against like Reed or Huey, but when you play against me, you don't get to wager more.
Fair enough. That's a nice double dig. I like that. Well, that's cool. And you said that that's happening this weekend?
Yeah, and there's actually going to be coverage. So even if you're not participating or not a member of Pro, you can actually watch coverage. Myself, Reed Duke, Huey Jensen, and Martin Juza will be doing coverage kind of all day, starting 9:00 this Saturday.
Oh, that is really cool. Yeah, and that's on the Channel Fireball stream?
Yep, twitch.tv/channelfireball.
Very, very cool. Of course, if you want to support the show directly, you can do so via the Patreon that I just mentioned. Is patreon.com/limited resources. Okay, let's get in to the action here. First things first, we got a crack a pack to do, but I still don't have any actual physical packs, so we've cracked a virtual pack. And let's take a look at that right now and see what we've got. I'll go through our normal sequencing here. We did open a Jungle Hollow. So that's the black-green gain land, so something to keep in mind. Right. Anticipate is our next card? No.
Not a card I'm obviously going to have a high priority for.
Mm-hmm. Next is the Almighty Brushwag. One of the best named cards in the set, no doubt about it. And it's proven to be a card you can put into a deck and not be embarrassed by, though it is a little narrow. Not a good first pick, obviously.
Yeah, it is certainly better than you might think. The Brushwag has overperformed, which, is not a surprise. I think Mutate does a lot of the subsidizing of the Brushwag. But yeah, it's a cool card.
Yeah, I think that, we noticed that in the set review, and that is how it's played out, that this is something that you want to have in your Mutate decks. But the cool part about it is that it does actually do something in the late game, even if it isn't particularly efficient. There's many times where you'll find yourself with the ability to pump it twice. And you've got a 7/7 trampler of sorts. Next is Lurking Deadeye. That's a 3 and a black 4/2 flash human assassin. And when it enters the battlefield, you destroy a creature that's dealt damage this turn. Perhaps one of the easiest cards to put a read on your opponent. This happens a lot. The interesting thing to me that pops up is that you've got Lurking Deadeye So your opponent, attacks their stupid 1/1 into your 4/4, and you're like, haha, you have a lurking Deadeye. But then the other card that also happens to be in black is the I can't remember the Beckoner. The one to
give the creature death touch, Void Beckoner.
Yeah, where they're also doing that without costing themselves a card, right? And so it could be either, but in the real world, it often doesn't matter because the point is, am I willing to lose my 4/4 for this 1 point of damage or whatever? And whether they have the Deadeye or the Beckoner, it's happening. Playable. That's how I would describe Lurking Deadeye. A playable magic card.
Playable to good. Mm-hmm. I think the black-white humans decks can make use of this pretty nicely because, those your tokens can trade for 4/4s. Also, if you have a bit of an aggressive bet to you, like, yes, maybe your opponent won't attack a 4/4 into a 1/1 when you have the mana up, but it's a lot easier for you to go attack with my 3 tokens or 3 small creatures. If they take it, you just tap out and play something else, and you didn't really lose tempo. Whereas if you leave all the mana up for Deadeye, they don't attack into it, you could end up in a tough spot. So I have liked how the card has performed. Clearly, it's not going to be our first pick, but it's definitely a card worth talking about because it does a lot in this format.
Phase Dolphin has not performed well. 2 and a blue, 1/4. Whenever it attacks, you can have target attacking creature not be blocked this turn. It occasionally makes it into my deck, but I'm never happy about it. It's like, to me, a classic D. Like, it's just not where I want to be. Blazing Volley, that's red for a sorcery. And it does 1 damage to each creature your opponents control. We found some combos with that with our Cracker Draft last week with Obosh and also Lutri, both of which made it into the deck. But generally speaking, I don't put these in my deck. It just doesn't do enough.
Yeah, I think those combos that you mentioned are good, but other than that, Blazing Volley is a sideboard card at best.
Yeah. Main Serval, this card has done nothing.
I lost so badly to a main Serval deck the other day against someone who has 28 trophies. I don't remember who it was, but they had a bunch of main Servals, a bunch of the aura that gives +1/+1, and now it deals toughness damage instead. Like Solid Footing, I think is that's the one.
I don't know what that card's called. I forgot, but that is nice.
Yeah. And Reconnaissance Mission, the 2 blue whenever you deal enchantment, whenever you deal damage with a creature, draw a card, and they just beat me with a bunch of Garrison Cats and main Servals. It was pathetic. Like they obviously had a good deck and constructed it well. It was just I felt like my deck wasn't doing its thing because I was losing to this ragtag assembly, which performed better than some of its parts. That
is a bitter pill to swallow, but I like the ingenuity there from your opponent. Next is Heightened Reflexes. This is red for an instant. Creature gets +1/+0 until end of turn, and you put a first strike counter on it.
Yeah, it's funny because it's better than Kindled Fury, which is a card that generally saw fringe play.
Yeah.
And yet I still really think that this is not a good format for it. I think it's quite bad.
Yeah. I have found that Combat Tricks, most of the decks that I'm playing, they're not really the name of the game here. There's a few that I don't hate, but that's not exactly a compliment. Light of Hope, white, instant common. Choose one. You gain 4 life. You destroy target enchantment, or you put a +1/+1 counter on target creature. I have found this card to be, even with all those 3 disparate options, not a card I ever want in my deck. So no. Ram Through, green removal spell. This card's okay. It's 1 and a green instant, and it has target creature you control bite a creature you don't control. And it even
Ram Through's good.
Has trample. It's a good card. Yeah, you can play that.
I think that it's not a super high priority, but I generally do want 1 in any creature heavy deck, up to 3 actually in any creature heavy deck, because it's a really good rate removal spell.
It is.
I don't want to undersell it. It's probably the best card we've seen so far.
Yeah, I was going to say this pack has been rough. We are all the way to our last common, which is a Drannith Healer. So that's the 1 and a white 2/2. Whenever you cycle another card, you gain a life, and it has cycling 1. A mainstay in the cycling deck. And perhaps even the pick here thus far.
Yeah, I think I would be in for taking Drannith Healer right now. I'd certainly take it over Ram Through just because the cycling deck's really good, and Drannith Healer is such a low-cost card. Like, it doesn't take anything for you to put this in your deck. You'll play off-color 1-mana cyclers if you have any synergies with them. Like, imagine you end up in red-blue and have Prickly Marmoset. Drannith Healer is a card I would generally tend to run. And it doesn't ask at all, even in any white deck, for you to have a particular kind of deck while it's good in humans and all that stuff. Whereas like Ram Through, for example, is more color committal and asks you to have a decent amount of creatures. So it's asking a lot more from you.
Mm-hmm. Well, let's hope the uncommons save us. First one is Necropanther. That's the 1 black-white 3/3. And it's got mutate for 2 and then 2 Azorius hybrid. Not Azorius. Orzhov hybrid. Thank you. Whenever this creature mutates, return target creature card with converted mana costs 3 or less from your graveyard to the battlefield. Man, I have just never been able to make this thing like sing. You know, I feel like if I mutate it and get something back at any point, I'm thrilled. And I had higher hopes for it when I first read it.
This is an aside, but I think it's actually a pretty valuable lesson. If you haven't read Paul Rietzel's article on Channel Fireball a couple weeks ago at this point about learning how to draft a new format, I think it's a fantastic read. It's on the free side too, so I really think you should check it out. We'll make sure to include it in the show notes. And one of the things he said that really resonated with me is after you've drafted a lot, pay attention to which cards make you feel good. Like, you're expressing the same thing I feel about Necropanthers. I've never had a game or deck with Necropanther where I'm like, this card's just humming. This card's doing its thing. This card is like slotting in perfectly. Whereas when I see a card like Drannith Healer, a 1-mana cycler, I get that little the little jolt of excitement. Yep. And those feelings are important. Your subconscious is really powerful. When a card makes you feel good, and the key is you have to have played a decent amount to start to have these feelings, have a basis. But at this point, we've all played a lot. When a card makes us feel good, that's a good indication that card is good. When it doesn't, with Necropanther, it makes me feel a little bit more that, maybe this card isn't exactly where I want to be. Yeah,
we should talk about that on a Level Up episode one time, because that's something that I had to really learn to trust, was that feeling. It not necessarily the this is great or this is terrible, but the more subtle feeling of how many times have I read a card, said, this is a good Magic card, right? Like, this does things that are powerful and good in a game of Magic, and played it in the format in which it's in, and just kept playing it, even though it never quite worked. It never quite came together. I never had that feeling, like you like to say, like I was getting away with something, right? And, or I got a big advantage, or boom, I drew it, or whatever. It was always like, this card should be working and should be good, but I know that it's not, in the back of my head. And Necropanther fits that for me. It's a card that I've devalued because I've played it enough times and had it not do really powerful or even anything enough times that I'm like, no, I just don't want to do that anymore. And a good example is that the Beckoner, the Void Beckoner that we talked about, that puts the Death Touch counter on your creature. That's a card that looks kind of in the middle to me, right? Like, when we first read it, I didn't think about it in terms of the Reanimator deck because I didn't know that was going to be a thing. And I thought, okay, well, 90% of the time, maybe higher, you just cycle this thing and get a Death Touch counter. That's fine, right? I just remember thinking that's okay. And then in the weird situations where you have a ton of mana, you can also cast it. But even when you do, it's not like a bomb. It's just a really powerful, big creature. But in practice playing it, I want it. Like, I feel like I always trade up, with that counter. That counter is a removal spell if combat is happening, right? And it's one that I get to draw a card from, albeit losing something on board that might be a weaker creature or something. And then when you add to that the fact that these black decks often have ways to get that type of creature back, it's gone up in value for me. But that, I can explain that to you because we have a podcast and we're used to talking about it. But I had the feeling that card was doing better than I thought that it would early. And I commit to that, so we should do a segment on a future Level Up. Maybe it's not a whole episode, but a chunk of one where we talk about how to kind of develop that and then pay attention to it. Cause I do think it's really important when you get to the advanced stages of limited where, like we always talk about, we're working with incomplete information all the time. So you have to go with hunches. You have to go with intuition sometimes. But at any rate, with Necropanther, I have it down. It's not a card that I value particularly highly. Next
it looks like it should be good, but just doesn't quite get there.
It just doesn't quite get there. Titanoth Rex is next. That's a similar one, by the way. It's 7 green for the 11/11 trample. You can cycle it for just 1 and a green and put a trample counter on a creature you control. And, this is another one that maybe not quite as much as the Beckoner, but, this one's an absolute premium card to get back with any type of Reanimator thing. And it is castable at 9. Like, there's so much mana ramp and mana fixing in green that you will find yourself with 9 mana sometimes. And this thing's a real problem. Like, you can't chump block the Rex, so when this thing comes down, your opponent really has to have an answer for it very quickly or they're going to lose the game. And, it would be my pick right now out of this pack. I would have it over the healer. And by the way, we have Sanctuary Smasher too, which is another of that cycle that we keep referring to. This is the 4 red 6/4 first strike, and you can cycle it for 2 in a red and put a first strike counter on a creature you control. And it's been fine. It's interesting because Death Touch basically always lets you trade. Titanoth Rex giving trample is fine, but I'm actually more interested in the card itself for the ways that I can get it onto the battlefield. And Smasher kind of splits the difference. Sometimes first strike is relevant, and sometimes it's not. And sometimes a big 6/4 first striker is fine, and sometimes it's just okay. It can die to some stuff. So I still have Titanoth Rex as my pick here. One more card is Bonder's Enclave. This is our rare. This is the land that taps for colorless, or you can pay 3 mana, tap it, and draw a card, but only if you can only activate the ability if you control a creature with power 4 or greater.
This card is powerful in a long game, but this format's pretty fast and rewards you for playing to the board. I haven't found Bonder's Enclave to really play into that particularly well. I think looking at this whole pack, I'd still just be on Drannith Healer. Just because I feel like the upside of A, being in the cycling deck, and B, the fact that it's a really low cost to slot into most decks, and it goes into a couple different decks, which I like. But I think that, if you want to take like Titanoth Rex and try to go for like the Reanimator style deck, that's not outrageous either.
Yeah, at this point in the format, I would take the Titanoth Rex, but I do find it a little depressing that Drannith Healer probably is correct mathematically. Like, again, for the reason that you said, in your worst case scenario, so let's say you're not playing white, you're not playing a deck that cares about cycling, you can still have this in your deck as a almost nominal cost. And it's just, that's why cycling for colorless is just not my favorite.
Yeah.
Okay. So there's our Crack-a-Pack. We're probably taking the most boring, lowest level of the payoffs for the cycling deck yet. That is what this format can be. All right, let's get to our questions. These, again, are questions from our patrons. If you want to get on and answer questions and that kind of stuff, or be able to ask questions, you'll find that if you're a patron of the show at any level, whenever we have shows like this, or if I have guests or any number of different things, I'll reach out to our patrons as our most dedicated listeners and people, that'll get to ask questions. So let's start off. This one comes from Sean, who says, is there an existing ability or keyword that you think would be good in Evergreen or at least Deciduous? Maybe Escape or Surveil, says Sean. So just to explain, Sean's asking, they call, there's a subset of abilities that are considered Evergreen. And those are ones that the folks at R&D down at Wizards can use in any set that they want. And it doesn't have to be a specific mechanic just for that set. And then I assume Deciduous, Sean, means, something that they can use often, but maybe it's not quite in that full-on Evergreen status. Though I've never actually heard anybody say Deciduous with this type of stuff.
Yeah, I think it's something Morrow came up with. It sounds like a Morrowism.
It sounds like a Morrowism. Yeah, it does.
I mean, cycling's already like that, I think. I don't know that cycling's quite evergreen, because it doesn't show up quite as often, and when it does show up, it's a little bit more of an emphasis than something like Scry can show up in basically any set without it being remarkable. But I don't think Surveil is a great choice for that, because it conflicts so much with Scry, and I think there's a segment of players, even though Surveil is more powerful, it is. Putting cards in your graveyard is generally better than putting it on the bottom, because you almost never get to the bottom of your deck, and there's a lot of graveyard synergies. There's a lot of players who don't want to do that. So I think that Surveil is probably just a worse choice than Scry in general. I'm trying to think. I
have a question. Is cycling evergreen? It's not, right?
No, yeah, I think cycling is deciduous, as it were.
Okay, so something that comes back off and off. Okay, I get it.
But it might even be a level below that in terms of, we've seen it a couple times. I've seen it a bunch of times, but it's, again, usually a bigger focus.
Yeah. I mean, I would like to see cycling. Like, I wouldn't hate to see it just pop up here and there and kind of have it just be a thing that we understand and know. One that I'd love it's interesting, just from like a what I like standpoint, would be Morph. I love Morph. I think it makes formats better, but I would never put it at Evergreen because it's such a heavy lift for people that haven't played with it before. It's too complicated to, assume that people understand all of these things that aren't necessarily printed on the card. So I would never actually do it if I was an R&D. But I do find that those type of mechanics that lend flexibility, to cards do improve formats quite a bit.
Yeah, I think Morph is a pretty good choice. I like some amount of like flashback or jumpstart sort of stuff, but those feel like bigger mechanics that like slotting in one of those cards is like a little bit more difficult.
Right. Cause it makes you want to like put more graveyard centric stuff and. Yeah. I don't know. I don't really know I don't have one that jumps out, but cycling is the one that came to mind. It's just one that I would love to see in every set.
It could be cool to see a cycling mechanic that's like 1 or 2 mana, or like not one. Sorry, one if it's colored mana, like green for cycling instead of 1 colorless, or like two colorless mana cyclers, or basic land cycling sprinkled in a set more often than just being a whole mechanic. Not that we're going to see it anytime soon, given that we just had Ikoria, but. I guess I'm looking forward to the next time Zenith Flare gets printed.
All right, Zenith Flare at Evergreen. That's Luis's final answer. William says, given the companions are a bit too pushed, perhaps, how far back would you pull them to be a good fun rare, given they're always in your hand, undiscardable, and an extra card? I like this question, William, because I think that this actually strikes at the core of part of the reason why we have the mechanics or the companions that we do, which is that I believe that if you were to push these back far enough so that they weren't an obscene advantage by having the things that William outlined, that they would be boring. Like what if it was, let's just say it was a 3/3 for 3, right? And, and that's it. Vanilla, or even a crappy, let's say it's a freaking 2/2 for 3, right? Just like a junky creature that you don't really want. And there was just like a minimal deck building requirement. You would still see people like making that work if the requirement wasn't enough. And in my mind, I don't think that there is. So this is how I view it. There's a few things that you need, check marks that you need to hit to make this a successful mechanic. The card has to be exciting enough, powerful enough. The restriction has to be enough to make it worth the cost. And from a marketing or selling cards perspective, the card has to be flashy or special or interesting. And I don't think that you can hit all 3 of those with these, because once you start pushing the power level up, if you make the deck building requirement too strong, then nobody can play them. So then you've just shot yourself in the foot. And if you lower the power level of the companion too low and make the deck building requirement not enough, then they're boring and nobody cares, or they're not worth even bothering with. And if you try to, work it the other way, where you work with the deck building requirement or the flashiness or the power level, then you could lose that excitement level of a really cool companion. And to me, I believe at this point that there is not maybe for one of them or something, but I don't think that you could put out a 10 card cycle and have them all fall in that range.
Yeah, it really depends on where you want it to hit. And the struggle whenever you make a new card or set or mechanic or any of these things is, and this is why power creep happens, you want the new cards to affect things. We've had sets where if a set gets released and very few of the cards get played in, like, say, standard, then I don't think you can call the set a success. It's actually didn't hit hard enough. You want the cards out of the new packs to be relevant. You want people to be excited about the new cards and not say like, oh, look, Theros actually had this problem. Theros block standard, where mono blue devotion and mono black devotion didn't change really dramatically for like 3 sets, because they were so locked in on the Theros mechanic that, and all they cared about was blue cards and black cards, and also not really even expensive ones at that. So you don't want that to happen. But then when you power up the cards, you don't want every set to have subsequently more powerful cards to compete. And when you do a new mechanic, it can also be dangerous or tricky to get it right. I don't think they did on companions. I mean, I think companions are too powerful. I think most people would agree with that, based on, we've just seen some of them start to get banned in Legacy and Vintage, just Lurrus and then Zerda and Legacy. Will we see more? I don't know. The part I would have probably approached companions for is make the companion rule a little different, because part of it is it's a free card. Like I think I might have mentioned this before. I don't remember if I did, but I've been playing Blue White and Pioneer, and it plays Kahira the Orphan Guard as its companion, the 3-mana 3/2, with no relevant text because the deck has no creatures, so that beats the restriction, and it doesn't care that it's a lord. It's not playing it for that. It's playing it because a 3-mana 3/2 that comes out for free, that's basically always in your opening hand for free, is really powerful. And first of all, that doesn't seem to be in the spirit of the companions. I don't like that my creatureless deck gets a free 3/2. Right? It's like, cool, you're playing creatureless, so you get a 3-mana 3/2 draw card. And second, I think that it takes all away, because besides taking away a lot of flavor, it's also just really powerful. And it would imagine if companions cost you a card in your opening hand, where like if you start with a companion, you start with that card, but then you only draw 6 or you draw 7 and put a card back. So it's like you have 6. And that would be one way where I think even some of the companions we have now, which are like too good in this world, could be acceptable, because I agree you don't want to make the restrictions too powerful, and you don't want to make the companions themselves too weak, because that's not very fun. It's not fun if, like, look, realistically, if you wanted a fair companion, let's say it had a no or minimal deck building restriction, a fair companion would be like a 3-mana 1/1 or something like that.
Right. And that's just so like
just
not
fun. So
what you want to
cares?
do. Yeah.
Yeah. So I think it's a dangerous mechanic, just flat out, because it strikes at the variance that really makes Magic fun, and it's obviously going to be tough to balance and all that. And then the as it stands, like they came out pretty high right out of the gates. So we'll see what future companions look like if we get more of them. The place I would start is probably by making it so they're not a free card, because once you take out the free cardness, it can be a lot more about the effect of the companion. Kahira is in my Pioneer deck because it's a free card. If you took that part out of it, I wouldn't play it, and then you would see decks that really want Obosh or Lutri or whatever these cards are to synergize with their deck but they're paying real costs for it, so you kind of feel like it's fair.
And do you mean you would have your opening hand be 6 cards, and then you get the companion?
I think I would. The one I like most is when you have a companion, you draw 7, then put 1 back, kind of like you mulligan to 6.
Okay.
So that you're still having a fair amount of kind of a backstop where you're still getting decent hands, because with the Lennon mulligan, going to 6 isn't the worst, but you are paying a very real cost to this. You're not getting just a free card.
Yeah, and then I just as a personal note, this stuff's interesting. Like trying to turn the knobs to get everything perfect, and I think it's a worthy discussion and something that was very difficult for R&D to actually pin down. And, they missed in some cases here. But you mentioned it briefly, but my personal opinion on companions actually goes beyond that. I don't like repetitive gameplay built in. I feel like the best parts of Magic are the non-repetitive gameplay aspects of it. And having face-up repetitive aspects of a game I just think it strikes at one of the things that makes Magic interesting and fun. And again, I always try to think about there's other players, and, I'm sure there's Commander players who are like, well, hello, like this is the most popular format and it has that exact thing built in. And I've even played it and I get it, but it does feel different to me. Commander to me is its own special thing, and it doesn't play out the same way that limited and standard and, competitive, one-on-one Magic does. I like the repetitive nature in a setting like Commander because it gives you an identity, right? It gives you a way to sort of show what you can do. At any rate, great question. William, next question comes from Matt, who says, Luis, teach us your smoking secrets. What kind of smoker do you have? What wood do you use? What's your cooking temperature? Favorite seasonings? And then Matt also says, all info is appreciated? Put a question mark on the end of it. I think that was supposed to be an exclamation point there.
Yeah.
Can you give us a quick rundown on
Yeah,
I don't have a, smoker, so I don't,
So I used to have a charcoal one, but actually I got an electric one. I like it a lot better. I'm sure there's some barbecue purists who are gonna lambast me now, but I have a master built electric smoker, and it really is simple. You plug it in and you turn it to like the gauge to kind of where you want the heat. You still have to kind of keep track of it a little. As for wood, I've been using pecan, but I've got a bunch of different kinds and they're all fine. Like I don't know enough yet to really tell a huge difference between which kinds, though there are recommendations you can find there. My go-to dry rub is pretty simple. It's just salt, pepper, smoked paprika, brown sugar, and chili powder. And I find that gives you the kind of barbecue-y taste that you're looking for. Mm-hmm. And in general, I found you want to cook beef and pork at a pretty low temperature for a long time, and like low and slow is the motto. So, when I cooked some beef ribs, I did it like around 200 for like, so it was like 6 or 7 hours. Chicken, you want to cook a little higher because it doesn't cook. You don't want to cook it as long. It just doesn't, it dries out. It doesn't really work the same way. So that I've cooked around 250, but somewhere in the 200 to 250 range is the ideal. You don't want to go much higher because at that point, like, you're barely using a smoker. You just use an oven or a grill. The whole point of the smoker is a low temperature for as long as possible. And it's less work than you might think, especially if you've only used a charcoal smoker or seen people use those. Those are a lot of work. And I feel pretty good about taking the easier route in this particular case. Okay.
Spencer actually asked us a question about companions and if we would change the rules around them. But then Spencer realized that we had already been asked about companions. So added an additional question. If you were a planeswalker in lore, what type of creature would you want as a companion? I want a jellyfish.
A jellyfish would really limit where you could go, though.
I want a flying jellyfish.
Oh, a flying
like a gomazoa.
That can go everywhere. Yeah.
Yeah.
I would probably want I think a monkey would be pretty good because monkeys are pretty tricky and they can get into stuff. And as long as it's like a relatively well-behaved one, which I don't know if you can get, that would be pretty sweet.
Am I your companion monkey? Is that?
Yeah. Well, no, that's more of a great ape.
Yeah. What about Carrie Zev's companion?
Ragavan?
Yeah, Ragavan. There you go. You could steal him.
Ragavan won a Pro Tour, Yeah,
there you go.
Successful monkey.
Yeah. All right. Next question comes from our friend Shivam, who says, who, by the way, is from the Casual Magic podcast and a friend of ours. My biggest issue with Ikoria is that I can't figure out where I'm supposed to be in a draft. I take a few mutate cards and suddenly every other card is mediocre cyclers. Take a cycling card and there are no payoffs, but a ton of monsters. How do you find your lane here? Says Shivam. And that's a good question. Of course, it goes to fundamentals of draft and such, but I think we can point back to the Crack-a-Pack as a potential way to gauge things. We opened up a mediocre cycling card, right? One that you always put in the cycling deck, the Draneth Healer. But we took it over potentially more powerful stuff because it is a fallback plan where you're basically able to take that card and keep yourself open to being in the cycling deck if people are passing it to you. But you can also just have that be a 1-mana cycler that sometimes you put into your mutate deck even. I mean, hopefully you have enough playables to not. But it's we call it hedging, right? Where you're taking a card that could go in multiple directions and trying. The truth is that you want to prolong that decision before you commit about as long as you can. If you find yourself in pack 3 and you still haven't, then maybe just nothing's open. But, I like to get into pack 2 before I can make that decision wholeheartedly if possible. That doesn't usually work out that way. It's usually about halfway through pack 1 where you kind of settle in. But that's, I'm always hedging. I'm always going, okay, give me a sign, give me a signal. Let me figure out what's open here, and reading those signs over and over again.
Yeah. So the important really parts to take away from that is the longer you can delay the decision, the better, but also make the decision when there's a sign to make the decision. So, one of the most fun experiences in draft, as we both well know, is it's the end of pack 1 and you have 9 black cards and you're just feeling like the world is your oyster. Whatever you open in pack 2, you can go. Unless you open like a color intensive blue-white rare, you're golden though. You can open, a red card, a white card, a green card, a blue card, and any of them could go with all your black cards. Or if you're lucky, you just open a good black card and keep going down that route. Mm-hmm. But the flip side of that is if you're drafting and then like you see a 6th pick Fire Prophecy or an 8th pick Snare Tactician, like you got to jump on that.
Yep.
And when you do that, those are implying a lot of future value. The whole point of draft is to figure out what's open, and the hardest part of draft is abandoning the picks that got you there. So, to use the Fire Prophets example, imagine you first picked a good white card, you second picked a decent white card, and then your 3rd, 4th, 5th, and 6th picks were like, let's say, blue cards. And then you see a 7th pick Fire Prophecy. Even if the 2 white cards you picked, even if you started with Luminous Broodmoth and another like solid white card, like let's say Pacifism, even if those 2 cards are better than Fire Prophecy, I would generally take Fire Prophecy because it implies a lot of future value. And maybe you end up white still. I'm not saying you just completely pivot, but you got to be open to that and keep that in mind, because the whole point of pack 1 is deciphering the information that you'll use to be in the next couple packs. Because look, it's not hard to settle into a lane and take the cards for that lane. It's part of the reason I think the first Modern Masters set was a little bit boring for me to draft, is because the lanes were so clearly defined that once you're in the affinity lane or once you're in the green-white tokens lane, you just didn't care about anything past that, and it was not difficult to draft those. But in general, when you have a deck you're in, it's not super hard to figure out what the best card is for that deck. The tricky part is when you settle on a deck, and you don't want to be like, I'm blue-white flyers 6 picks into pack 1, because if you get past Fire Prophecy then Rumbling Rockslide, maybe you should be blue-red spells. Maybe you should be white-red aggro. Who knows? Mm-hmm. You should be open to those things, and the later in a pack you get a good card, the more you should weight that information.
Yeah, 2 points I think to follow up with what Luis was saying there. One of them is, Shivam, make sure that you know all the archetypes, right? Like if you're, maybe you're only thinking in terms of the really big, broad, heavy hitters like Mutate and Cycling, right? But there are others, right? I've drafted blue-red otters, right? Where you're trying to get thieving otters and make those work. I've drafted blue-black, which isn't one of the headliners for the set, but I've had success with it. There's some powerful options with removal and counter spells and some tempo stuff. And I've had really great decks out of that don't come together that often. So make sure that you're keeping your mind open to some of the sub archetypes there. And then the other one thing I wanted to point out, was the unintuitiveness of what we're really saying here. There's I think a human reaction to saying, I can't seem to find a lane. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to sit down and I'm just going to get in a lane, right? Like I open up a card and I'm just going to, I'm never going to let go, right? And then I'm going to have a deck with all the cycling cards in it. But the actual thing you should do is the opposite of that. You should try to stay open for as long as possible so that you can find the lane that's actually open rather than forcing it. And good luck, Shivam, and everybody can check out the opposite of our podcast, Casual Magic. No, it's not actually, but you should check out Shivam on that stuff. Next question comes from Robert, who says, draft decks from 8-person pods are more powerful than 6-person pods, which are in turn more powerful than sealed decks because they have about twice as many packs. My question is, would bigger pods mean more powerful decks or diminishing returns kick in? Would there be a downside to nothing ever wheeling in a 14-person pod? Well, it certainly hits at some point, right? Like if, let's say you had a 100-person pod, right? Those packs just don't get around enough percentage of the thing to meaningfully do it. So 14 would seem to be the highest reasonable thing you could do. How much better are the decks in a 14-person pod? I don't know. I mean, still good cards get taken, right? It's not.
I think in general the decks would get better, but it's probably diminishing returns because at past, like you said, first of all, past 14, it's whether there's no difference between 50 and 100 because you're not just seeing anyone except those people within that radius of you. Yeah, I would imagine they would get better, but part of the reason that like the difference between 4 and 6 is bigger than the difference between 6 and 8, which is bigger than the difference between 8 and 10, and so on and so forth. Mm-hmm. Just because like if you look at the proportion of the pool versus the portion of new cards getting added, keeps going down as you get bigger and bigger. But yeah, I would expect them to be more powerful because what will happen is, let's say you're the Whisper Squad guy. If you want Whisper Squads, then you're going to be able to see more packs where the people who don't want Whisper Squads won't be taking them, and you could easily end up like you're more likely to end up with 8 Whisper Squads in a 14-person draft than you are in a 4, 6, or 8-person draft. I think the power level probably goes up more for the more linear niche decks that want specific cards that don't have replacements. It's not going to change how many Fire Prophecies you get for the most part. Because people are going to take the Fire Prophecies because they're really good. It will change how many Whisper Squads you get, or potentially even how many cycling cards you get. Though again, that'll depend on what the people around you are doing a little bit more because those could go early too.
Yeah, exactly.
As for wheeling, I don't think wheeling's intrinsically a part of draft that has to be preserved. Like you can predict. It gives you a little. Look, I like it because it gives you a little bit more of a tool of prediction when you're like, "Ooh, I'm going to first pick this awesome red rare." And then I'm going to look at this pack and I'm like, wow, there's 3 other good red cards. Maybe I'll get one of those back. But you're not really planning on that. So I don't think it takes a whole lot away if instead of wheeling, you just got different random packs.
Parker, for our next question, says, have you found any unexpected benefits of the quarantine in regards to personal health, entertainment, or relationships? For me, Parker, no, I have not at all. I was actually hoping at the beginning of the quarantine that I would be able to focus on personal projects or, stuff like that. And maybe, some stuff that I wanted to work on, but, felt too busy or was gone too much. And that, my personal relationships would be fine and all that. And that has not been the case. I've just been struggling with a lot of stuff around it, not just the quarantine. I think the quarantine adds a layer of anxiety or stress that is not normally there that makes it harder. But I found it very difficult for me I feel bad most days now. And so I haven't found any unexpected benefits. I was thinking at the beginning that I would learn how to cook a bunch of new stuff and I would be, maybe working out more or doing some stuff. And it's just I've realized that the social structures around me, carry a huge weight with how I feel on a day-to-day basis. And already given the nature of my job, I'm lacking some of those. I don't get up and go to the office every day where I get to say hi to some people and know some people and kind of be a part of a bigger thing, right? I work from home and I have to travel, right, for work a lot. And so when I'm out traveling, then I'm with my circle of people that I know and the ones I don't. And I'm in context, right, when I'm doing that. But now that that's gone, right, because there's no more events or anything, I don't have any of that stuff, So for me, it's actually just been tough. I have not. It has been very eye-opening about my personal mental health and how I approach these things. I think that I didn't have quite enough before the quarantine and didn't fully internalize that. And now without it, I just feel like I don't have anything, and so for me, I'm trying to use this quarantine time as a way to reevaluate that kind of thing and come out on the other side with a better approach to it where I'm spending more time at home and more effort to build up social and whatever structures at home that I don't have to travel for or lean on in that way. So I'm trying to make that my silver lining, but right in the middle of it, no, I wish I could be happier, but I have not found unexpected benefits of it.
Yeah, I have found, I think, a little bit more on the positive side. Part of it is, getting to Smoker was one of those projects I wanted to do, but yeah. I will agree that, I never really was under the illusion that I would get a whole lot of extra stuff done under the quarantine because I just, from the outset, it already put a ton of pressure on me, just because of the work side of things for CFB was we have to scramble to refocus and figure out what we're going to do when we can't.
That's panic mode for
operations as normal. And so I haven't been having as hard a time as you, which, I'm really sorry that's happening. Obviously, we talked about it. It's tough. But for me, it's a different kind of stress, which has just been work. So, I mean, I guess at the beginning I did think, maybe I'll stream more. If you look, I have not been streaming more. I just am so exhausted at the end of every day. Yeah. I have found the little times where I can carve out, part of the excuse of the Smoker is I get to just hang out outside and just kind of, tend to that. And I find it therapeutic, and that part has been helping, but yeah, it's tough. I my sign off a couple weeks ago did capture this. Yeah. And it was to you also, this isn't a time, this isn't like a vacation where you get to have self-reflection. Maybe it is for some people. And if it is, don't feel bad. Some people are like, it's actually funny. I was talking to my mom and she was feeling kind of bad because she's actually the happiest she's been in a really long time, partially because she loves gardening. She loves working in her yard. She has this huge double lot where she just has a ton of projects going on. And both my brothers are able to home now and able to help her because they can't work. And she feels bad because the circumstances are bad that are leading to this, but she really does like this result. So I told her not to feel bad about it. If good comes of it, that's awesome. That's just extra value for the world,
Yeah. And I certainly don't begrudge anybody who does feel better. I don't want to, put my stuff on them, but that's just my answer for Parker. Also, one thing, and I've mentioned it just here and there on the show or whatever, but when it does come to this stuff, I've had I mentioned on one of our things that I was late for therapy or something like that. And people, a couple of people reached out and said, thanks for normalizing therapy or whatever. And I was like, hey, I didn't even really think of that. I just was talking. But I mean, I have been doing that, like that is something that I have no shame in whatsoever. I recognize that I needed help and I reached out for it, so, if you are struggling or whatever, for the love of God, it is 2020. It's okay to go see a therapist. You do not need to be ashamed of that part of it. So do that.
And I have at many points in my life as well. Like I'm currently not, but I think it's something awesome. And it's something that, I have no doubt that at some point I will again. Like it's kind of like going to the gym, but for your emotions.
Yeah, that's a good way to look at it. And nobody ever goes, well, I had to go to the gym. It's like people brag about it, so don't sweat it. Next comes from Matt, who says, what are your thoughts about running more than 40 cards in a Ikoria companion deck? My experience has been that it's so easy to deck yourself. Why? Why is it so easy to deck yourself in Ikoria? I mean, the decks, I've been running Ikoria as a not companion, and just putting that card into my deck and being quite happy with that result. But even when I have companion Ikoria, I've drawn 2 or 3 extra cards. It's not like I'm decking.
I also find that the Ikoria decks, if they get to the late game, they almost always crush. It's not that the issue I've had with Ikoria decks, and I've actually kind of done the same thing as you, where I've taken a Ikoria early and just sometimes if you get enough frost lynxes, sure, it's a great companion. But if you looked at the companion win rates, Ikoria had actually a really low win rate as a companion because giving up all 2-drops is actually really big. And a lot of the times I think you're better off just making a normal deck and putting this powerful card in your deck.
Yeah. Which is rare for a companion. Most of them, I do work pretty hard to get them in my companion slot.
Yeah. I mean, I guess this is a time to revise the companion power rankings a little bit, where I found that Yorion and Ikoria are generally better off not being in your companion slot. The effect they have on your deck, I think, is sufficiently negative that you shouldn't be going for them most of the time, though some of the times it's still fine. So that's a little bit of an update, but I'm kind of confused as to how this is happening, because that just goes contrary to my experiences with Ikoria. So my guess is you should probably not play more than 40 cards. And if you're losing late game with Ikoria decks, you've solved one of the problems, but have a new problem, I guess.
Yeah.
So, which sounds like a better problem to have, because Ikoria is intrinsically better at winning those late games. Maybe you just need more finishers, but I would not look at playing over 40.
Yeah, I don't think you need to, Matt. Next comes from actually a different Parker. We've got 2 different Parkers here. Hi, Marshall. Some of your best episodes have been full of magic-related advice that is applicable to life as a whole, such as sometimes you do everything right and still don't get the results you want, and it's important to recognize when that is and when it isn't the case. Have you considered doing a magic-themed advice podcast? You could call it Surveil the Options. That's cute. I have not. I don't know. I've never thought of it. I like talking to people about their life and about things like that. So that could be fun. I don't know if I'd be comfortable in an advice role. I don't know. I feel like you want to have a little training or a little something before, you go spouting off. Well, this is what you should do. I like talking with that about people that I'm close with, because I understand them and I know, how they are. But with strangers, I feel like there's some danger there, right? That giving people advice that you don't really know could be perhaps harmful for them in some cases, which would make it not good. I don't know. I'd have to think about that. I like talking to people, so that would work. But I'm not a therapist, so
Yeah, I think both of us are very, very aware of the effects of what our advice can have, and I think we both do a lot of caveats. Like when we talk about things we are, confident in, that we're, like magic, obviously, but even like cooking some dishes we're pretty confident. But when I talk about like, I like an electric smoker over charcoal, and I made sure to hedge and say like, hey, look, I know barbecue experts probably are better informed. And that goes, 10 times more important when we're saying talking about advice that could lead people to like quit their job or,
right.
Or reevaluate their relationships or anything like that. I really want to make sure that we're giving advice we're qualified to give, which is not not the typical strategy for I think people who like talking heads these days. But
yeah,
I like it. I like sprinkling in because I do find that Magic has taught me a lot about a lot of different things and how it's shaped how I approach the world, and that kind of stuff is really interesting to me. But we also try to be really sure we either know what we're talking about or make it clear when, hey, this is I'm talking like. I don't know, when I talk about stuff like involving weight loss, for example, I can share what worked well for me and what I like about it, but I make sure to tell you, like, I'm not a nutritionist. I'm not a personal trainer. Like, you can listen to me talk about my story, and I think that could be applicable and important. It's not, I don't want to misrepresent what I am, so.
Yeah. It's interesting too, how that actually translates to the podcast itself, because, the way that media is done nowadays, especially around gaming or sports or anything like that, is that it rewards sort of a hot take or a very strong stance, right? Where you come in and go, no, Karuga is absolutely the best. That's what people respond to now. But I'm always operating from I'm trying to operate from a place of reality where I go, I could feel pretty confident about the thing I'm about to say, but I don't know. Nobody does, right? We're all making guesses and doing the things that we can do the best, right? And I have seen it so many times that everybody on Twitter decided something. All the experts, all the pros, everybody's like, oh, this card's broken. This is a thing. This can't happen. This is a thing. And then you look like a month later and it's crickets because the format, developed back around it, right? And it actually wasn't the issue that people thought, but they're rewarded for making those takes. And as content creators here on this show, it's a tough balance because I want to give people useful, real advice to help get better at limited and not come in with these stupid, over the top confident takes where if you go, how do you know that? Like, why are you so confident that that's the case? Right. And it's like most people just go, right? There's no data. You don't have any data, right? You don't have anything to actually back up like a claim. There's some stuff that's anecdotal that does become obvious or does become, something that we accept as a fact. And I'm fine with that. But it is interesting that it's not just with life advice or things like that we hedge. I like to try to keep it as real as we can on the show. And that means saying, this is what I think. This is where I'm at on this, but I'm not going to say that it's that it's the truth because I'm always willing to listen to somebody else's opinion on it, All right. Next question. Let's see. That's the podcast. Will says, hey, Marcel and Luis, any predictions, wants, or spoilers, that you're excited about for the new core set? It's weird. I feel like they're not for us in a way.
I don't know. I really liked M20. I drafted a lot of M20. Mm-hmm. Part of which I pushed for Mythic, which I almost never do. And I hit Mythic drafting M20 and I enjoyed that. But one of the things, look, this is probably a downside of content creation a little bit. I don't get excited about new sets anymore. I don't get excited about spoilers anymore. It just it's not that I don't like playing with new sets. I love playing with new sets. Drafting a new format's like one of the most fun things. Mm-hmm. But the whole speculation reveal season doesn't do it for me.
Right. Like you want to get your hands on the dang cards.
I want to play with the cards, and that part's fun. But because I don't know, it's because of set reviews, the fact that we exhaustively review all the set, and I do the written one also. Maybe it's because there's so many releases these days. I don't know. I mean, I have been in a position where I don't know, you got like the LR preview cards and I just don't look at them until we're going to do it on the show. Cause like it's funny. I don't want to be a downer cause I really do love playing with the new cards, but for me, it's like when I can get my hands on these and play with these, when I get the whole spoiler and I can look at it and start reviewing it, those are the times which I engage with it. I don't really care that much when it's like, here's a new card or two. Like, sure, a flashy card, the one that implies a lot about the new set is going to be cool. I remember being really excited when I heard we were going back to Innistrad. Like, that did excite me because I love that setting. When I saw the preview video with the like Angel's Feather dropping, I'm like, oh, we're going back to Innistrad. This is so cool.
Yeah.
When it's like, here's it's core 2021 preview season. It's like, sure, I'll see the cards at some point, and when I get to play with them, then I'll be like excited. But I like, you asked me like, hey, what are you hoping for at core 2021? I don't really like think that way anymore. I don't know. It's just not part of how I engage with the cards.
Yeah, for me, I'm similar in the sense that like I think about it in terms of bigger picture, and kind of what I meant for when I said it's not really for us is not that I don't want to draft it. What I meant was what I hope it does is resonate with players who don't currently play Magic. Like I remember when they first reintroduced core sets back in M10, 10 years ago or whatever, that they, went for that core fantasy flavor, that resonance that they wanted to have. And they really knocked it out of the park with those core sets. And, I think that that's like, if they can continue to do that, then that's great. Now I understand that there's an issue because those don't sell as well with us, with our listeners, with me and you, right? The limited players like them because they've done a good job of paying attention to limited, but they haven't, resonated with the more established players because they're just simpler sets. So I hope that they serve the role for the newer players because I'm always trying to keep an eye on people coming into the game. That's a group of people I'm very partial to. Colby says, for Luis, since I know Marshall isn't actually a gamer, have you ever played Slay the Spire or other recent video games that incorporate MTG style deck building mechanics into other game genres?
Oh, I love Slay the Spire. I think I did a sign off about Slay a while ago. It's a super fun game. I am a big fan of games like that are relatively, like I would say low to maybe medium, like how to getting into it, but high depth and a lot of replayability, because I already have a game, like Magic, for example, is already a game that requires a lot of it takes a lot to get into Magic and is very engulfing, which is where I spend most of my time. But having things like Slay, or like when I talked about Return of the Obra Dinn, these like smaller, more packaged games is a lot. It's that's the sort of thing I'm really into. So yeah, I do like other games as well.
Here's one from MM Sword who says, what's the most memorable example of you have of being punished for your own hubris? I don't know.
It happens all the time, but
I don't see myself that way. I mean, I definitely have when I was younger, especially when I just feel like I was just more aloof or dumber in general, or just didn't really pay as much attention to things, where there would be like longer term examples of me thinking, it's fine, I got this, it's okay, everything's okay. And then at some point recognizing that wasn't actually the case. And in retrospect going, that wasn't even close to the case. These days, I don't consider myself somebody who really suffers a lot of hubris. I really try to keep myself pretty well grounded as best I can. I don't know. Nothing specific comes to mind.
Oh, I'm sure I get punished for this all the time, but I don't really have a specific example. I'm sure. So plenty of people will point them out.
Yeah. I'm sure there's plenty of us on our draft videos or whatever. Next question comes from Grayson, who says, in playing Ikoria, I've been stuck by the feeling that it's very cube-like, and it made me think that WotC took inspiration from popular cubes in designing the format, but I can't really articulate what makes something feel cube-like. Is it complexity, power level, replayability? Despite the prominence of a few archetypes, I've found Ikoria to be extremely replayable with lots of interesting decisions in the drafts and the games, especially when a table knows how to draft it. Has anybody else had this feeling? If so, can you better explain what makes a cube feel, well, cubey? Interesting.
I guess I haven't felt that about Ikoria really. I kind of the opposite, just because cycling is such a linear deck that is not something you would see in a cube, and kind of so is Mutate. So I think that describing the cube-like experience of like high synergy, high power level, that I can understand that part, because Ikoria does have that. But one of the core conceits of cubes is no duplicates, and Ikoria is one of the sets where duplicates matter more than most sets.
Yeah. I haven't felt that way either, Grayson. It hasn't come across as feeling like a cube draft to me particularly. Definitely feel like one of the hallmarks of cube is the ability to go many, many different directions, even within color pairs. And I haven't felt that from Ikoria. South says, hey, Marcel and Luis, brand new patron here. Thank you, South. Just wanted to quickly say thank you for the hard work you guys put in your content. It's helped me become a much better player, and your podcast is one of my favorite parts of the week. Thank you. My question is this. I'm a younger player and have only been playing since Kaladesh. I'd love to try my luck in higher level tournaments, but I'm not very good at standard. What would you recommend I do in order to try and break through into the competitive scene? Boy, you got to be good at standard these days, don't you, Luis?
That's a pretty big.
You're just not getting.
It's a pretty big
that.
part of really any organized play. Depends what your goals are. So when you say competitive scene, it's like if your goal is to qualify for the highest level of tournaments, then yes, for sure, standard. Like just because that's the most commonly played format in these tournaments, and the qualification paths are more standard, though there are others. But if your goals are, I want to play in tournaments, maybe not only just the highest level of tournaments, then you can find formats that appeal to you. Like you can find good competition if you're willing to play on Magic Online for tons of older formats, and you can play like challenges on the weekends. Like, you know, I tend to play like Pauper and Vintage challenges on the weekends when I have time, and those feel like big tournaments to me. There's 7-round tournaments cut to top 8. You win a bunch of Magic Online prizes, and they're pretty fun. And they're very competitive. The people there are very good. So you can get into those formats and really start practicing them if that's what your goals are. I actually want to give a little shout out to Pauper, which I do sporadically, just because it's just not that expensive to get into. That's the conceit. It's all commons. So you'll be surprised at what some of the commons are worth, but it is all commons. So you're not nearly as taxed. But ultimately, like Marshall said, if you really want to if you want to show up on Magic Esports Twitter and have them talk about how you won this tournament and like you want the fame and the glory, you're going to have to play standard and learn arena. Those are the paths that get you there. And those are fine paths. Like those are things that are a lot of fun. And arena is also not that expensive once you've built a collection, which does cost money to get there or a lot of grinding. But once you do, I found that like for a while you have the baseline where you can build new decks without like tons of costs.
Yeah. And also, you know, keep in mind that if you are playing non-standard formats, you are still learning and building your game, and it does actually help even for standard. But when it comes to specific tournaments, you do need to focus in on the decks that are relevant there and get really good with them. Matt says, do you remember the tallest man you ever met? Yeah. I mean, I guess I don't know the specific person, but I mean, I've played basketball against people who were, 6'11" or 7 feet. So that's probably count. I had to guard them too. That was not fun.
My daughter met Huey, he's like what, 6'8",
yeah,
and certainly the tallest person she's ever met, and she'll routinely tell me that Huey's the tallest person, like full stop. So, Papa, you know who the tallest person is? I'm like, oh, she's like, it's Huey. It's like, so
that's enough evidence for me.
Yeah, there we go. So we proved that Huey is the tallest person.
Yeah. Josh says, I've always thought being a celebrity would be awkward because there are people who know so much about you while they're complete strangers. Have either of you had any awkward encounters with fans? Sure. Yeah. I mean, yeah. I guess so. I mean, it's like, look, go ahead.
I'll say this. I'm glad we're not real celebrities.
Yes. That's a good way to put it. Yes.
We are celebrities in the sense that, like, look, if you go into a Grand Prix, when we're doing coverage, for example, a lot of the people there know who we are and they'll talk to us about the things we do, and they'll know us through the podcast or whatever. And that part's cool. You can have some awkward encounters for sure, but it's fun. I'm just glad that in our like normal lives, it doesn't really happen. Like it happens every now and then. Magic's gotten popular enough that every now and then I will run into someone who's like, wait, are you LSV or especially if I'm wearing like a piece of Magic apparel or something like that, mm-hmm. or if you're drinking an Arnold Palmer. Yeah. But I'm glad that, like, I can't imagine what it's like for people who get recognized everywhere they go. It sounds miserable.
It sounds awful. Yeah. Yeah. Our interactions with fame are actually very limited and actually generally pleasurable. That thing that Josh mentions does happen, which I haven't really found particularly awkward, as long as it's acknowledged in some way, which is that they know a lot about you. And I know this exact feeling because there's podcasts that I've listened to for years. And I even had the chance to meet one of the people that did it once. And I just felt like I know you. Right. And I'm like, wow, you have you know literally nothing about me. Right. I could be any number of people to you. And it does feel weird to meet somebody and just feel like I'm a part of your life or, something like that. And you haven't met, and I've had people say that kind of thing to me too, where they're like, look, I know that you don't know me, and then they'll say some, real personal stuff or whatever. And it doesn't bother me. But Yeah. Next question comes from Alyssa, who says, when picking between two cards, how much better does the one have to be to leave your current colors? I had someone pick a Rex over a Whisperer, even though Whisperer would have followed their colors. You know, that's like one of those questions that is highly contextual, Alyssa, right? You want to, there is so much that goes into those decisions. Generally speaking, and this is a hard thing to speak generally about, but generally speaking, it needs to be quite a bit better. I mean, you need to get pulled over into another color if you have established colors, right? If you're pick 7 and you have established 2 colors and there's a card in there that makes you think about going over, it better not be a mediocre card. It has to be a signal. It has to be a real kind of stands out to you as like, you know, being that person in the store who says, why is this still in the pack? If you have that in your head, that's probably a good reason. And what you'll
don't say it though,
but don't say it out loud. What you'll often find is that, if you really look at the cards that you have, people tend to make up their mind that they're in a certain color pair much earlier than they're actually in that color pair. For example, you'll be like, well, I'm blue-red. And you'll look at your pool and you're like, well, I actually have 4 red cards and they're all pretty good and red seems open. And I actually only have 2 blue cards and one's strong, right? I took it early and I kind of made up my mind. Maybe it was even your first pick and the other one's mediocre and there hasn't been blue flowing. You might not be blue-red, right? And that black card, you know, you got a blood curdle in 7th pick that's facing you down. Take the dang thing. Like that is absolutely enough as an example to move you over. Right now, if you're deep into pack 2, it's different, right? If you really are the blue-red deck and you have a ton of those and you open up, you know, your 4th pick or whatever in pack 2, maybe you're down the line a little further in 6th pick and, you know, you see a Thieving Otter and you're like, okay, that would be okay in my deck. But then there's a Blood Curdle, right? That's much closer. I probably would take the Thieving Otter and just stick to my guns if I was really a blue-red deck with a bunch of viable picks in both colors. So, you know, in short, it does need to be something strong, but the later that you go through the draft, the stronger it needs to be to move you.
Yeah. I think you covered it pretty well. That's the whole game. I mean, that's what drafting is.
Yeah. Plato says, what habits have you formed during the COVID-19 quarantine? It is weird.
The good ones or the bad ones?
Yeah. I mean, I have formed both, I think. At least I've been trying hard to keep with the decent ones, you know, even though there's a lot of days where it's just like, oh, whatever, you know, like I don't want to do anything, you know, cause it's just the same day, you know, everybody's making the Groundhog Day joke and stuff. But yeah, for me, my life is a lot different, but it's also a lot simpler. That's been maybe one, you know, going back to our other question, a thing that I have recognized is that I do prefer a little more, like I do feel a little too spread out in my normal day-to-day life where I'm constantly thinking about travel and what I need to be doing. And I just don't have a lot of, you know, like when you go to work at a normal job, you show up and then you go home and you do the things that you need to do while you're there. And then you don't when you're not. And when you're running your own thing, it's kind of just, you know, what do you want to work on? Should you be working more? And, you know, you have to struggle with that kind of stuff. And this has simplified that, you know, but I do have a habit of eating like frozen pizza, which I didn't even like it. I haven't eaten it in a long time. If I wanted pizza, I'd make one or go out to get one. And now I just, you know, whatever, eat whatever's in the freezer, which I never did before.
A good habit I picked up is I have spent a little more time where I try to carve out like an hour in the afternoon to just kind of unplug and just be, you know, relax outside. And I'd like that. That's helped because I just have, you know, not only did we both work at home before, now we're just always at home. So I'm looking for ways to get out of that mind space sometimes.
Yeah.
The bad habit I've had is I'm just eating too much. Like I think part of it, I've always been kind of a boredom eater and oh man, am I bored? So
yeah.
It's tough. It's tough to balance that. It's always been tough for me.
One habit that I did remember that I've been doing is I've been going for drives. You know, I don't actually go anywhere, but I just get out and roll down the windows and drive. And that really does help. So,
yeah.
Let's take one more here, Luis, before we got to take off. Unfortunately, we've left quite a few questions here, but I kind of like that we went deep on the questions that we did get to, and we could even, try to.
I do want to encourage people, like I like getting draft pick questions and stuff on Twitter, but like feel free to ask questions about non-Magic stuff. They're fun to answer, especially the good ones. So that's the kind of thing that I do enjoy. So
yeah, if
we didn't get to your question, or you could think of a question that would be sweet, feel free to send it our way.
Anthony says, "Hey folks, when there's an arena cube, which by the way has been announced, and we know when it's coming too. I can't remember, but I think it's with the core set when it comes out or something. It said in the announcement. Which card would you like to have added that isn't already in the client?"
Ooh, I don't really have a super great grasp of what's in the client or what can be added. If it's literally anything, I love Riftwind Cloudscape. I know you're the Manowar guy and all that, but I've never passed a Cloudscape and Cube in my life.
Yeah.
So that one and Birthing Pod are like two of my favorite Cube cards. And Birthing Pod, I really wish was in the Modern Cube, but
yeah, I think a lot of people will probably hate me for saying this, but I'd like to see opposition. I'm kind of a junkie, and I know that card's just broken and stupid and shouldn't even exist. But I like giving the little creature decks a chance sometimes. So I'll say opposition. It obviously would be completely broken in the context of a cube that doesn't have other broken stuff. But yeah, that's my guilty pleasure. Okay, let's call it a show there, Luis. I got to be on a meeting here in just a little bit for a broadcast, and we did get to quite a few of the questions there. Maybe I wonder if we just run this back next week. We didn't quite even get halfway through.
Yeah, maybe we'll do like a short bonus episode or something like that where we can figure it out. We'll figure it out.
We'll figure something out.
I'm not promising anything.
Yeah, worst case, these end up becoming the question of the week questions, but yeah. Okay. But that'll do it for this one. As always, thank you for joining us and hanging out with us for the week and talking Magic. And in this case, a little real life got in there too. And hopefully, everybody's doing okay and taking care of themselves the best they can. If you want to find us on social media, as Luis mentioned, I'm Marshall_LR and Luis is LSV. You can find everything related to the podcast at lrcast.com. And I want to mention our sponsor one more time too, Channel Fireball. I'm going to put a picture. I'm going to put a link of that Paul Rietzel article up. And then you can also, while you're over there at CFB, check out the details on that CFB Pro tournament coming up on the weekend and see if you're interested in that kind of stuff. Look, it's been cool to see, Channel Fireball continue to grow CFB Pro and keep adding more to it. And, I think that that's something that, especially if you're a real competitive player, you might want to look into because there's a lot of really great information there. And, it's not a bad deal at all, especially when you look at the different options that you can get for it. That is going to do it for this episode of LR. Thank you so much for hanging out, and we'll see you next week.
If you want to enjoy a constructed format where, first of all, there's no companions, and second of all, you get to cast Brainstorm, Preordain, Augur of Bolus, maybe Chittering Rats if that's more your style. I do want to talk a little more about Pauper because
those are all my style.
Yeah. So look, a common complaint that I've heard people level against Pauper is that it's too grindy since none of the cards are like all the cards are like trying to be a little 2-for-1s, and I'm like and you're just trying to, it's like resource management, and I'm thinking like that all sounds great, so yeah, go on. In the second, there's also there's a wider range of decks than you might expect. There's aggro decks of like the mono green aggro deck that's all 1-mana 2/2s and the giant growths. There's mono red burn. There's this white-red Boros Monarch deck, which is white-red mid-range, and honestly, it's so much better than you might think, but it somehow strings together Battle Screeches, Faithless Lootings, Squadron Hawks, and Palace Guards that give you Monarch, and just ends up grinding out even the control decks while using Rally the Peasants and Battle Streets to kind of beat people down. Like,
wow,
it's a deck that doesn't sound like it should work.
This sounds like it's not a Luis deck, but
no. Well, my point is not that I play the deck because I've never played the deck. My point is that I almost always lose to it no matter what I'm playing, and it's a much better deck than it sounds like. Red white midrange sounds like the worst. But there's Tron. Look, there's all these decks. It's cheap to get into. You do have to play on Magic Online, which I know is not everyone's favorite thing to do, though I love it. And honestly, I have just been having a blast playing Pauper recently. I've been playing Blue Red Delver mostly, which is a deck I think you would enjoy.
Yes.
And there's just a lot of cool stuff going on that feels like a weird mix of like some of Magic's most powerful cards, Lightning Bolt, Brainstorm. These are the kind of cards of preordained. These are the kind of cards that are legal. But on the other hand, you're seeing people play with cards like Fairy Seer, Kumbaj Witches, Selhana Ledgewalker. Like there's just a wide range of cards that get played, and there's actually a lot of really good viable decks that I really enjoy playing with. So Pauper's got a pretty thriving community, and you can find plenty of Pauper content on CFB or other places. And there's multiple Pauper challenges a week. Plus, you can always just play leagues on Magic Online, and it's a good thing to do. It's a good place to get into. I think that for people who enjoy Limited, it's actually an interesting way because it plays much more like games of Limited. It's obviously the cards are more powerful and the decks are more focused, but it's got a lot more reminiscent of Limited games where you care about combat, you care about sequencing your creatures, and there's no planeswalkers, there's no companions, there's no huge effects like fires or anything like that. You're a lot of the stuff that dominates other formats in Constructed doesn't exist in Pauper, and I think Pauper is the better off for it. So really fun format and something worth checking out. I mean, I feel like all my signups are just me recommending things, but that's because I like a lot of things. That's good. I like getting into things that I like. So
yeah,
I've been having a good time doing that.